Usually when I tell someone that I study cosmology, I get a reaction like, oh, I didn't know you were so into hair and nails. If you want to piss off an astronomer, ask them how they like their job in astrology. If you want to piss off a cosmologist, ask them how much they love cosmetology. But I was thinking about this, and I thought it would be a great way to start because there's actually a beautiful backstory. Because cosmetology comes from the word cosmatos, cosmology comes from the word cosmos, and they actually share the same Greek root, which is cosmos, which is roughly translated from the Greek, which means to order, or something that is well ordered. And so those two words had a similar meaning in ancient Greece, and of course throughout the centuries they started diverging. One started meaning to adorn or to decorate, to make someone look pretty. Another one started to refer more to like the order of life, the order of world, harmony, yay, woo. And then we get to today, where cosmetology means roughly the order of hair, dress, appearance. You get words like cosmetics, cosmetology, and you get the order of the universe, cosmos, and cosmology. And so I get less mad when people make this mistake, because I think this is kind of beautiful. So next, I wanted to give you a cautionary tale. I like audience participation. So here, I have some pictures of some old dead white philosophers, and I want you to take a guess, in addition to their oldness and whiteness and deadness, what do they all have in common? Any guesses?
Brown eyes.
Actually, I think Aristotle might have blue eyes in that picture. I'm not sure. Good guess.
Surprisingly good singing voices.
Really? I don't know. I feel like Bertrand Russell would be a good singing partner. So the answer is they all wrote a book in which they claimed to have uncovered the deepest understanding of the universe. And the other piece of that is they were all subsequently overthrown by the next generations of philosophers who argued against their ideas. And so if anyone has an interest in cosmology, I would caution you to not believe anyone who claims to have all the answers. And if you are in this field, to have a little bit of humility about what you are saying and doing. And so from a philosophical perspective, we can get to cosmology from sort of these three branches. These are three of the five kind of classical branches of philosophy. If you take philosophy as an undergrad, you'll see classes like this. Logic, the study of what is true. Metaphysics, the study of what is real. Epistemology, how do we know what we know? This leads to basically the forerunner of cosmology. Science, this is my personal definition, which is something a lot of philosophers would argue with. And I have a pretty technical word here, ontology. Don't be afraid of it. It just means the existence of being, or it just means the study of being or existence. And so those two things combine to give us modern cosmology, the study of the universe as a whole. And usually when we study it, we have an emphasis on birth, growth, shape, size, and eventual fate. And so for the next few minutes, I want to take you through a quick history of this discipline, combining science and ontology with my own creation, the Sci-Ontology meter. I hope if any of you are lawyers for any cult-like organizations, you will please not sue me for this. So keep an eye on our Scientology meter. It's going to move about. Yeah. So the first real development in cosmology is this transition from mythology to what we would call natural science or natural philosophy. In ancient Greece, this is kind of a Greek-centric talk, but in ancient Greece there are, the myths of Zeus throwing a thunderbolt, and that's how we got thunder. Prometheus brings fire, that's how we get fire. What the Greeks really gave to us was this idea. The quote here, it says, Aristotle said, "The world we inhabit is an orderly one, in which things generally behave in predictable ways." And this is what I would call the fundamental axiom or the fundamental assumption of science, that the world behaves in predictable, orderly ways. And so from the Greeks and from mythology, there was a transition to finding patterns in nature. So, for example, Pythagoras founded a very weird mathy cult, and Ptolemy came up with a very convoluted epicycle system, but they're both very lovely pieces of evidence of this transition. And so our meter moves a little bit more towards modern science. Then in the 14 to 1600s, we have another group of revolutions. So we have folks like Kepler who map out the orbits. We have Galileo finding the Jupiter moons. This, I think, is actually probably a little less known on the science side. This is a book by Francis Bacon called Novum Organum, and it spelled out what today we would consider to be the first outline of the scientific method, this idea of experiment and testing hypotheses. And of course, we have Isaac Newton doing his thing with gravity. And this really spells a transition from a natural philosophy of statements to a natural philosophy of models and mathematics and describing the universe in celestial mechanics. And our meter moves again. Then we have the relativistic era. It's an obligation. I put an Einstein there. I tried really hard to not put Albert Einstein on the slide, and somehow he snuck on there. But the real insight of the relativistic era is this beautiful quote from John Wheeler. I think this is one of the most beautiful quotes ever said, even in general. I had to get it, general relativity. Try. I'm not doing stand-up. But he said, space-time tells matter how to move, matter tells space-time how to curve. And so around that time, there were some scientists who thought, well, if you think of the universe as a whole, on average, what would all of the matter in the universe do to all of the space-time in the universe? And so they came up with this idea that the universe could be expanding or contracting instead of just being static. And I have some pictures here. Friedman and Lemaitre, who was a monk, were credited with coming up with this idea from Einstein. But any of you who take GR and you see that FLRW metric, these are the guys who did it. And then the other key piece is right around that time, Edwin Hubble also gathered evidence that the universe was expanding, which conformed to this new idea in relativity that the universe could expand. And so we see this next transition. Then we have this era in physical cosmology that I'm calling the era of physical cosmology. And I think what really kicked that off was Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, who look like the most badass 1960s movie stars, I think. Like they kind of give me this like Men in Black kind of vibe, like Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. They accidentally discovered the cosmic microwave background and confirmed the Big Bang Theory and accidentally essentially won a Nobel Prize. And the cosmic microwave background might be the most important piece of observational cosmological evidence we've ever discovered. Another very important development around this time was Vera Rubin, who I've heard multiple people call the most gypped out of a Nobel Prize ever, was looking at how galaxies rotated and noticed that galaxies were rotating in a way that suggested there should be a lot more matter than we thought. And so the question became, what the fuck is that gap in our rotation curves? And so we have the idea of dark matter. And now cosmology is a full-blown science. And so now, since the 90s, we're in what we call this golden age of cosmology. And that golden age term was actually coined by a scientist named Jim Peebles, who's one of the most accomplished cosmologists alive, wrote a whole book that I highly recommend, won a Nobel Prize for his work. He coined this modern era, the golden age of physical cosmology. We've had these missions that have brought new light to the cosmic microwave background, most recently which is the Planck mission here. We have new evidence that not only is the universe expanding, but that expansion is accelerating. So not only is stuff moving apart, but the rate it's moving apart is going a lot faster. We now have simulations. This is not actually a picture of the sky or galaxies or the universe. This is actually from a computer. We now have the ability to simulate universes in computers to try to verify our models. And finally, gravitational waves, which I will leave as a teaser for the next talk. And so now we are basically off the charts, and cosmology is a quintessential physical science. And so our current model is called lambda CDM. It sounds scary. The lambda basically means dark energy exists. We don't know what it is. It makes up most of the universe. So when you see the lambda, it just means dark energy is, The CDM stands for cold dark matter. So the dark matter part is just, we know there's some dark matter out there. We don't know what it is. And that makes up 95% of the stuff in the universe. The stuff of us, protons, neutrons, electrons, that's about the other 5%. And so quick note on what cold means. Here's a simulation of what cold dark matter looks like. So we ran a simulation, made the dark matter cold. On the right, we made it hot. This is a picture from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. And so you can see these little dots are galaxies. And so you can see that matches what you see in the cold versus the hot. So we live in a lambda cold dark matter universe. And so what can we look forward to? On the science side, lambda CDM has a few little tensions to work out, which may become major tensions really soon. Gravitational waves will have a lot of cool things to say. We are in some of the first generations where we might realistically see general relativity fail, which might sound scary, but it's also very exciting for scientists. And then on the philosophy side, I wanted to leave you with one question, which I was thinking about as I made this talk, which is I was channeling my little 8-year-old, and I was curious whether a purely scientific answer to the origin of the universe would ever satisfy curiosity. And so, for example, if we came up with a theory of everything that explained the universe and every physical thing in it, there would still be that 8-year-old who would stand there and say, but why? So, thank you. So for questions, since this is a brewery, I also wanted to try something. I will take a sip of my drink for every question you ask, as long as it's a question that is in good faith and relevant, and not what is my favorite color, and not...
He's going to judge us.
Yeah, so I want to challenge you to finish my drink.
Tell us more about Vera Rubin's non-Nobel Prize.
Yeah, so one of the...
Wait, did you drink it?
Oh, man.
It wasn't a question.
It's true, that was a statement. Yeah, so Vera Rubin... I'll go back to that badass picture. So she did a lot of her work in the 1960s, and science has quite an unfortunate history of whiteness and maleness, and I don't think she particularly got her full due for her research and contributions until later in her life. One of the quirks about the Nobel Prize is you must be living to be a recipient of the Nobel Prize. And she, I think, was getting to the stage of her career when those conversations had started, but then it was her time to pass, which I think was in 2016? That sounds about right. But yeah, I mean, widely regarded as one of the most influential researchers for our modern understanding of the universe, and Nobel Prizeless. Any other questions? Yeah.
What was the accident that resulted?
Could you say that a little louder?
What was the accident that resulted in the discovery?
Oh, what was the accident? That's a great question. So the question was, what was the accident that resulted in the discovery? So Penzias and Wilson were working at Bell Labs in New Jersey, and so they were trying to set up I think it was a receiver for the telephone company, and they kept getting static. And they didn't know what the static was. So you can think of like on an old TV, like you have that like black and white like static thing. And so they kept investigating their antenna. I think the one of the stories is they thought it was bird poop that was interfering with their receiver. And so that, they checked it out, they cleaned the bird poop and all of that, and they were still getting the signal, but they weren't looking for it. There was a research group at Princeton that was being led by Jim Peebles, and I think there was maybe even another group that had predicted there would be a microwave background and had just started to search for it. right around the time where they accidentally found it working for the telephone company trying to get their receiver to work. And I know there's a letter or two out there to Peebles where he realized that he had been scooped essentially out of a Nobel Prize-worthy discovery that he had predicted. Scooped basically means you are working on a scientific idea and another scientist gets to it right before you do and kind of gets all the credit. But yeah, so they weren't actually looking for it. Other people predicted it existed, and then they just found it right before that and won a Nobel Prize. Yeah.
So you said that in somewhat near future, we might witness general relativity fail.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, then what? Do we fix it?
Then
or
we all
what?
still have jobs. Yeah, so we know that general relativity can't be perfectly correct, right? Physics has this incompatibility between general relativity and quantum mechanics. And so you'll hear things like quantum gravity, and there are a lot of theorists who are way smarter than me that are trying to figure out how do you make quantum mechanics and general relativity work together in a consistent way. So that is part of it. The other part is, though, on the experiment side, we haven't gotten to the point where like either of those theories break down, where we have data that says general relativity predicts this, but our data says that. But we know that that point has to be somewhere for this tension to be resolved. And so the hope is with advances in gravitational wave detection, that there are ways that are very clever that we could potentially see some of those deviations. And then, yeah, what that actually means, that's what our research folks are here for. Yes.
So, your Scientology meter has been continually shifting towards science.
Yes.
Do you see any value in ontology in the modern scientific understanding of the universe?
Yeah, so the question was, as cosmology has become more of a science, do I see value in ontology? I think I do. I think the caution I have is, as a scientist, we very much look at the universe from a perspective of evidence, of experiment, and we just kind of say, well, anything that we can't test, well, let's just not go there, right? But I do think there is a value in asking non-scientific questions as long as we're clear that we're not being scientific about it. So I'll give you a cautionary tale, string theory, right? So yeah, I saw some of the physics people chuckle. So string theory is a theory that has been put forth since roughly the 1980s that tries to go like a level deeper than quantum mechanics. And to this day, it hasn't really been able to produce any sort of experimental test or any way to confirm or deny a lot of those ideas. And then so the question is, well, was all of that rigmarole valuable? And so I think some people would say, well, we just spent a ton of resources on essentially just pie-in-the-sky ideas. But then there are other people who would say, well, even the thought process itself gives us a lot of insights and a lot of value. And so I think I would encourage the scientists to not have such a knee-jerk reaction against anything that's non-scientific, but to think about it, but with those, like, kind of thinking of like, a bowling alley with the caution lanes on it. Like, let's just be careful going down that road, but that doesn't mean we can't. So, I also think the ontology side adds a lot in terms of getting people interested in it. A lot of us in the science community got here because we were interested in the philosophical questions. And I think there's something valuable about reminding ourselves when we're in the trenches of data and coding and math, like what were those very basic, more philosophical questions that got us here in the first place. So, yeah. Oh man, let's do Sarah first.
How do you answer the question from 8-year-olds about why the universe was created?
How do I answer to 8-year-olds about how the universe was
Or
created?
Why? The why question.
Oh, why? I would say I don't know. Like, I don't have an answer. You know, that's the interesting thing about the universe is it doesn't have agency, right? You can't ascribe an intent, a why. You know, there's no, you know, even within physics, like there's no underlying reason why the universe should have natural laws. That's just an assumption that we make. It's an assumption that's held up very well, but there's nothing about the universe that explicitly says that there have to be laws that it follows. And so when I come across a question like that, I think one of the things I like about being a scientist is that it has gotten me much more comfortable with the idea of saying, I don't know, and that's okay. So, and I think it's a valuable lesson for an 8-year-old too.
We have time for one more.
Oh man, Steve or Bill?
Arm
okay,
wrestle, arm
we'll
wrestle.
go Bill.
So actually, do you have an opinion that you will share about the anthropic principle as applied to cosmology?
Okay, so the question was, do I have an opinion about the anthropic principle? And if my memory serves me, the anthropic principle has to do with the idea that we can only live in a universe such that that universe would produce conscious, intelligent life.
You're allowed to say no.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion. I thought it was an intriguing, like, basis for questioning things, but I don't think I've ever gotten to a point where invoking that principle has led me to, like, a really fruitful philosophical or scientific conclusion about the universe. You know, it's kind of a fun point to make, but where that point goes, you know, I don't know if there's value that we found yet. Good question. Cool. Thank you.
Everyone, let's thank Bill again.